Welcome back, my lords and ladies, to the Cast Beyond the Wall. We are your guides to all things Westerosi, and we're here to bring you a review, an analysis, and a fan v fan debate on each episode of HBO's Game of Thrones successor series, House of the Dragon. In today's discussion, we're going to provide our initial review of the third episode of House of the Dragon Season 1, second of his name, before providing a breakdown of the story. And then we'll close out the show by speculating about what we think might happen next. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and I, too, kill all the messengers who offer me help. Dude, they say don't kill the messenger. I'm the guy who kills the messenger.
Kill more messengers, I say. Come on. All they do, they're all bad news. Good news, they give us good news, but they give us bad news, so it's probably just safe to just kill them all and no news.
Burn them all.
And then we'll just live in Billis. Yes.
Mad King style. Also super excited to be rejoined by my co-host, returning to me from the Riverlands of Southern Illinois. Sir, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Daniel Stoll, and I will just say I've never been hunting, but if I were going to go hunting, it would be really nice to have a team like Viserys where he just makes it super easy. You just walk up, you get your kill, and you walk away. Like that was the easiest hunting kill I've ever seen.
Daniel, you know what that's called? That's called being rich.
Yeah.
That happens when you're rich. People do that for you all the time.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Daniel, and I disagree here. I have seen you hunting many times. I've seen you hunting more times than you can count. You have been Goodwill hunting all your life, and I've seen this every day. So don't sell yourself short.
Well, thanks.
I'm so excited to introduce a guest whose name actually sounds like it belongs in Westeros.
No, don't put that shit on me.
Daniel of House Bo-Kemper. Daniel, welcome.
We didn't make it very long. We didn't make it later. Our line ended 500 years before House of the Dragon did, if you want to.
Did Aegon conquer you?
Yes. Multiple times. He brought us back to conquer us again.
Daniel Bo-Kemper, you've done so many amazing things on the internet, most of which is writing for the cinematropolis.com.
Thank you. Not a shameless
shameless plug whatsoever. Okay. But you've also written for the Oklahoma Gazette, World Literature Today, prolific writer, writing about all things media, pop culture, literature.
Very rarely television, though. So this is a little treat from the usual literature and cinema.
Very nice.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, now, okay, so I'm just going to listeners set this straight. I understand we have multiple Daniels on the show today, so we're just going to clear this up. I'm just going to say Daniel Bo-Kemper or Bo-Kemper if I'm talking to Sir Daniel of House Bo-Kemper, and I will either say Daniel Stoll or just Stoll for Sir Daniel of House Stoll. Easy enough?
I think so, as long as I don't forget my last name.
I heard you got okay. Don't forget your last name, please. Yes, I'd love to get your thoughts here. I mean, what have you thought about House of the Dragon so far?
I am really enjoying it more than I thought I would. It captures some of that old, very early Game of Thrones magic, which I really love. But it's also starting to shed that security blanket, as if it's starting to shed, I guess leaning on, the core series so much and presenting characters who are familiar but still very different. I also think that despite the number of characters, and there's quite a few characters, there's not like it's not a huge number, unlike another series out right now. But there are. I mean,
let's be real. This is all subjective. I would argue there are a lot of names to remember in House of the Dragon.
There's a lot of names, but there's
just not as many as certain other fantasy show that just debuted recently.
There's not as many separate storylines that they're focusing on. There's a lot of side characters. How about that? I'll say that. But as far as primary characters that are the narrative focus for all intents and purposes, there's less of those, and I think that's using it to its advantage. Less so perhaps than the original Game of Thrones series, and I think it's using that to its advantage. We're getting more developed characters in a shorter amount of time, but and right now that feels right, especially with Viserys, especially, and even Daemon and Rhaenyra. I think all of the main Targaryens, the house members of the dragon. The dragon family.
Targaryens?
Yes, we are. I knew that. Yes, the Targaryens. We are getting a lot more of them. I think they're definitely more of the focus, and I actually really like that here. Now, that might stumble later because we're already kind of playing with time in a very interesting way in this series, in that we're skipping a lot of it. But I think it's working really right now. Something's really clicking, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
All right, this is great. So you feel like this is a solid rebound from the end of Game of Thrones?
Absolutely. Yeah, like night and day.
Okay. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We have yet another. I'm so surprised at how positive all the guests have been when we welcome to the show. Because I'm always like, when we set out to do this specific House of the Dragon podcast, we almost didn't do it because we were like, do people really want this show? Is it going to be any good? And I was genuinely like, guys, we might get in here and this show might suck. And we're stuck with it for at least 5 episodes before we just tell everyone we're canceling. But so far, Daniel and I seem to be, Daniel Stoll that is, seem to be really enjoying it enough. And every guest, including you, Daniel, have been here saying, yeah, it's pretty good. So, hey, Congratulations, HBO. I would say mission accomplished largely. All right, so we have several announcements here that I want to discuss for you. The first of which is, hey, we've been alluding to a certain other high fantasy show that has debuted recently. And that show is Jeff Bezos' Amazon's Lord of the Rings of Power. So the first 2 episodes of that debuted on September 1st. That's right. If you're doing the math, that is last Thursday. And we are going to be doing a review episode between the 3 of us. That is me, Daniel Bokemper, and Daniel Stoll, just talking about what we thought of the first 2 episodes. It will not be a scene by scene breakdown so much as it'll be, hey, what do we think of Lord of the Rings in general? What's our relationship to it? What do we think of this new show? Does it work? Does it not work? More of a general review and overview and maybe some predictions about what will happen, but you're certainly not going to get as in the weeds as we typically do on House of the Dragon. That said, I'm very excited to talk about that show with the 2 of you gentlemen here. And listeners, you can see that, expect that to come in your RSS feed later this week. Number 2, here on the Cast Beyond the Wall, none of us are what you would call George R. R. Martin scholars, right? And sometimes when we read names, we read them a certain way the first time that's incorrect, and then we say that out loud. And then sometimes you say it out loud incorrectly, and your friends follow suit. And sometimes it's better to own up to it than just to pretend you didn't do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, in our previous episode, we were absolutely mispronouncing Alicent Hightower's first name. We were saying Alicent. I mean, it does look like Alicent, I will say, but I digress. Alicent is how the characters in the show pronounce her name, so it is Alicent Hightower. So I just want to apologize to every one of you that were raging at your AirPods or your car speakers about, damn, those guys don't know what they're talking about because they say this person's name wrong. You were right. We were saying Alicent's name incorrectly. I apologize. So it's Alicent Hightower. We have to set the record straight, and we will continue to do our best to do better in future with names. However, I hope you will give us just a little bit of grace, knowing that there are a lot of new characters that we're still kind of wrapping our heads around.
Watching episode 4, they just have a huge continuity error, and they start calling her Alicent, and then
I have to backpedal again. Keep apologizing for the incorrect pronunciations. Yeah. All right. So this next announcement here, we're actually going to discuss this a little bit because I think it's discussion worthy. So for those of you who read the headlines or read the entertainment news, you probably heard. For those of you who just watch the show and don't really stay plugged in on the internet, there's some big news in House of the Dragon this week. House of the Dragon showrunner Miguel Sapochnik will not be returning for season 2. Alan Taylor is being brought back as the lead director. Now, I'm not saying lead, he is probably going to direct episodes, but also like he is going to sort of oversee the directors and the house style that they do for the show in season 2. Now, I just want to call this out because you may remember if you listened to our preview episode for House of the Dragon, we were sort of, we talked a little bit about, hey, Miguel Sapochnik is really the only big returning creative from Game of Thrones that came back to the show. And again, he was more focused on the directing side of showrunning duties, which is interesting because I don't know if you guys have heard him talk about Game of Thrones anywhere, whether it's the documentary series in particular, or the documentary that came out after Game of Thrones ended in particular, but like, he seemed super duper burned out when he was making that last season. So honestly, when they announced he came back, I was like, wow, they must have paid this guy a lot of money or something. So with all that said, I want to get you all's take. What do you think of this shakeup of showrunners here? Daniel, Daniel Stoll, I'm going to turn it to you here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that when I think about Miguel Sapochnik, we talked about how some of his more episodes were a little more impactful. I think, if I remember correctly, Hard Home and Battle of the Bastards were both his, I believe.
As was The Winds of Winter, another one that
Yes.
was top tier Game of Thrones. Yeah.
So when I think of him, I have these like iconic, like big moments in Game of Thrones where it's not some of the things I love about Game of Thrones is like the smaller details. Not to say I didn't like the big moments either. And he, I think, really nailed those. So I think sort of actually what Daniel sort of mentioned at the beginning, where maybe taking off the security blanket a little bit, like Miguel was sort of here to help establish the foundation a little bit. And now that he feels like he's successfully set that foundation, he can leave it to some new people, which I think overall can be pretty exciting, actually. It sounds, from what I read, it sounds like this was, his choice and he wanted to move on. He has some projects that he wants to do, which I think is exciting for him. And I think it'll, be good to have some new direction for House of the Dragon now that he's sort of established, how to fit this in the world of Westeros. I would think I'm mildly positive, or not too worried, I guess I would say, with this departure.
All right. I like the positive energy. Daniel Bokemper, what do you think?
Yeah, if anything is draining your life force, allegedly. I mean, I don't think anyone has exactly said burnout, but I think, Caleb, you're pulling a pretty realistic thread when you mention that. It's definitely good to step back, no matter how successful it is. And it's not a loss for HBO, because it's my understanding he's still going to be working on another HBO series. Is that correct? Do you know, Daniel? Yeah.
He got a first look deal for his next series at HBO.
I see.
So what that means is he has basically the higher ups at HBO are like, we're going to hear your pitch and we are definitely willing to throw some money your way because you've done get right by. The first look is like a huge leg up. He's going to have a real opportunity to do something different that's his.
Right. So regardless, if ultimately at the end of the day, this sounds like it may have been the right choice for his emotional health, and that's a good thing. And he did establish, it seems like at its onset, a hell of a show. Taylor, most of his contributions are like early Game of Thrones, right? So the first 2 seasons was when he had the most.
Yes, most notably Baelor, the scene where Ned Stark lost his head was probably the most famous episode. But he did, I want to say, like 6 or 7 from seasons 1 and 2 in particular, and then he kind of fell. He did. I will say. He did come back for season 7, in which he did Beyond the Wall, the one that is that was named after this podcast, of course. But tragically, unlike this podcast, was a very bad episode of Game of Thrones, in my opinion. So, so it's kind of a bummer that he left on that note. But he has done also just to kind of call it out, Daniel. He also has done a lot of episodes of The Sopranos, a lot of other prestige TV. He directed, in fact, The Sopranos movie that came out last year, The Many Saints of Newark. He did a pilot, AMC's Interview with the Vampire series that's actually debuting later this year. He did Fringe, House, a lot of good actually, scratch those last 2. But anyway, he's a very well-known TV director that really, I would say, was probably pretty influential in helping the original season of Game of Thrones get off the ground.
Yeah, and what I remember from those, whether or not this was his direct influence, but it sounds like it is the dramatic tension in the cinematography. If we can see that, because I think the series, as impactful as it is right now, it's going to probably, and as quickly as it's moving, it might feel, it sets the second season up for a lot. And I think we are going to need more of that emotional tension. So if he carries that into the second season, I think it's in good hands. But as in regardless, I don't think it's like, I don't think anything catastrophic is going to happen with House of the Dragon as a result of this shakeup. But again, hopefully it does cause people to take a step back, allow people to live and work without these ridiculous expectations. So they can thrive as creatives.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to read a quick quote from the Hollywood Reporter story that broke this news. Sapochnik worked for months helping develop Dragon with his friend Ryan Condal before coming on board. Sapochnik had actually been very reluctant to officially join the project, a stance that perhaps foreshadowed his current exit. In quotes, Miguel said, "I'm never doing Thrones again," Condal recalled to the Hollywood Reporter in the recent House of the Dragon cover story. And then Sapochnik admitted, "I went through a lot of facilitating. Ryan and I had a long-standing relationship and we work well together and we really like each other. That was half the battle. As we got deeper into the discussions, I realized I had to do this shit or get off the pot." Love that analogy. I think what it comes down to is, again, if you go watch some of the behind the scenes from the last season of Game of Thrones, especially that documentary where he was working on the long night, he was working like midnight shift for months, like to do the show that unfortunately so many people criticized him for, by the way, which I don't think was totally fair. And as a person who has frankly wrestled with burnout for the better part of 6 or 7 years, sometimes it doesn't really matter what kind of money gets thrown your way or opportunities. Like if you are like creatively just drained and out of energy and you don't want to do it anymore, and your brain's telling you don't want to do it, your body's telling you don't want to do it anymore, sometimes it's just for the best if you step out of the way and let someone else step in and see and run with it and hopefully do something different.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts on the big news. Quickly, I want to remind you that if you do want to keep up with all of our posts on social media here at the Cast Beyond the Wall, you can find us on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT or on Facebook at facebook.com/cast beyond the wall. And I do want to remind you that we really need more reviews, especially on Spotify and Apple. Daniel Bokemper, you're in the hot seat. Have you reviewed the show on Spotify or Apple?
No.
Can you pretty please do that? You could do it by the time I get to the next section.
Yes.
Fantastic.
5 stars.
I knew I could count on you. 5 stars, 2 platforms. But no, just joking. Not switching the hot seat, Daniel. But anyway, listeners, if you could please help us. It's going to get discovered. It'll help us get discovered by more listeners like you. If you can just leave that 5-star rating. Heck, I think even if you give us a lower star rating, it's going to bump us up with the algorithm because it's more engagement. However, I prefer the 5 stars. If you want to say Daniel's got a sexy beard, Daniel, well, actually, yes, Daniel has a sexy beard, 5 stars. I know this is an audio only medium, but in fact, both Daniels do have very nicely groomed beards. Yes, again, Spotify and Apple are going to be the 2 biggest apps there. And lastly, just for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, I want to remind you that we will not be spoiling any future events of House of the Dragon. While I have read roughly the first 120 pages of Fire and Blood, it really doesn't get into any of the territory of this show. And we are not going to be spoiling information that comes later after the episodes we've seen. The most we may do is allude to things that are in the quote unquote next time on video that they post after the episode airs. With all that said, gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into our reviews and initial reactions to Season 1, Episode 3 of House of the Dragon, second of his name.
The road ahead is uncertain, but the end is clear. Aegon will be king. He's the firstborn son of the king.
You will be with your own child sooner than late.
I do not wish to get married.
Even I do not exist above tradition and duty, Rhaenyra.
None of it needs be this way in truth. No one's here for me.
So according to IMDb, the official synopsis for second of his name reads, Daemon and the Sea Snake battle the Crab Feeder. The realm celebrates Aegon's second name day, and Rhaenyra faces the prospect of marriage. So just really quickly want to go around the table to get reactions. Daniel Bokemper, you're the guest, so I'm throwing it to you first. What did you think of this episode?
I liked it. I don't know how it'll carry out throughout the remainder of the season, but we do get a lot of Viserys and a lot of his turmoil, I guess we'll call it that. And I don't, you don't get that sincere, like we didn't get it with Robert Baratheon, and really the core Game of Thrones, we don't get a super sincere examination of just a king. And I really appreciate that. I think this episode is a huge highlight of that. And it also has just a lot of metaphors and imagery that speak to the position that Viserys is in. We'll get into a little bit when we get to the play-by-play. But I really like the ongoing relationship we see between Sir Criston and Rhaenyra. We also even get quite a bit more of Daemon, again, further separating these characters from their, what I would say is their logical, like, core Game of Thrones equivalents. And that's a really good thing. I think especially Daemon is kind of keeping us on his toes as exactly the person he wants to be. And again, as somebody who is removed from the series and has no idea what he actually, when I say the series, both the book or any expanded lore that we get through the original Game of Thrones series, it's kind of keeping us on our toes. And I like that. I like that it's again just a character that's a bit of a mix, but still, kind of an asshole, but more nuanced than the ones we're used to seeing.
Nuanced assholes is what this show is made of, Daniel. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the conclusive sequence we get with him is great. It's a great set piece. It's a reminder that this is a more cinematic show. It does have one weakness narratively that we'll talk about. I do feel like what I don't like is some of what would seem like the major events are kind of glossed over. But I think that's sort of the point. But I just feel like maybe with like Alicent and Rhaenyra, their relationship, I felt like there was maybe another logical sequence with them before, suddenly there's a family that's fully formed and suddenly removed them for years. But the series might be going in a direction. I don't want to like fantasy produce and just assume what they should or should not show. But there is we'll talk about it more about the idea of setting up for something that you expect to see or that's going to be more meaningful. And it seems kind of glossed over.
Well, to your point, and I think if I'm understanding you, you're talking about how there is a 2-year or almost 3-year time jump between this episode and the last episode. And there's, the birth of Aegon seems like a pretty big deal, especially knowing how big a deal how badly he wanted a son. And we saw what he did to his previous wife for them to just totally skip over the birthing and the process and be like, oh, he's already 2 years old. Is that
right?
That's
exactly.
Kind of a hang up for you.
And what we have a very, significant scene in the episode 2 with, and even some that set up in episode 1 between Alicent and Rhaenyra, and to not have that, their relationship is clearly getting revisited. It just seems like there maybe there was an opportunity for something during the wedding night. Maybe there was some exchange. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe they went straight to formalities, and that this is just a sign of Rhaenyra's need to emotionally detach from this friendship in order for just to be able to live her life and focus on what she has to focus on. But again, pouring one out for old Mr. Krabs feeder because he doesn't last as long as I thought he would.
Definitely not as much as last week's episode would make us believe.
He was to bookend your last episode
with like really badass cinematography and ominous music cues. And
this guy is important for a second.
He got like as much buildup as Sauron got in the Lord of the Rings TV show.
Yes, he did. Yeah, but yeah, something tells me he does not have the longevity, unless we get swerved. And like
Crab Feeder comes back.
Crab Feeder family, the house of the Crab Feeders.
I already can see like they look out, and they look out over Blackwater Bay, and all of a sudden they see all these heads start popping up, and it's the Crab Feeder family. Okay, we got to get back on track here. This is going off the rails.
Riding giant crabs. That's all I'm going to add.
All right, giant crabs for the win. Daniel Stoll, what did you think of second of his name?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And it's interesting. I'm continuously being pleasantly surprised by this show, I think, for these first 3 episodes. I feel like every episode that comes out, I'm like, yeah, this is actually good. Like, I don't know if my expectations were just low coming into this series or what, but every time the more time I spend reflecting on these episodes, the more I like it. So when it comes to this episode, I thought it was another good continuation. I also really like how, maybe it's because of, we're doing a little bit of comparing to Rings of Power right now, but I really like how tight the story is right now, how it's very focused on just Viserys, Rhaenyra, and Daemon, and basically the rest of the characters, how they interact with that family dynamic of the Targaryens. But it also doesn't feel forced either. It's not like, hey, we're only going to focus on the Targaryens and not tell you anything else. But I don't know, it just feels really organic the way the story is being told right now. And so I really like the focus. And Daniel actually said something when he was sort of summarizing how much we've gotten of Viserys. And it reminded me a little bit when he said that about in the first season of Game of Thrones, how we got a lot of Ned Stark. And we've already talked about on this podcast how, with all these injuries that Viserys seems to be occurring, how like he could have the demise coming soon. So I think that comparison is interesting. But specifically about this episode, I really love the continuation of these small character moments. I really am starting to care a lot about these characters. And I think the cinematography continues to be really good. And I really like what they're doing with like these like the Viserys fingers or the stag, and how they're using these sort of like symbolism and metaphors throughout the show to sort of make a bigger point about the series as a whole. I've really enjoyed that. So yeah, I the more we get into this series, the more I'm being sold on being a fan long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you hit on Daniel Stoll, the Daniels. Can I refer to you as the Daniels?
When we both agree, yes.
Yeah.
You guys direct. You're the duo who directed Everything Everywhere All at Once.
We did best film of 2022 right now.
Oh,
you're welcome.
Really is actually go listen to. Or sorry, go watch the movie. So I don't want to repeat too much of what you said, but so this show has done a thing where it simultaneously feels very similar in a lot of ways to season 1 of Game of Thrones, while also having some really key differences. The similarities being, all right, we got a king on the throne, and as I boldly predicted last week, and I swear up and down, Viserys ain't making it through the season, guys. I'll be surprised if he makes it halfway through the season. I'm not even joking. I mean, we're getting a lot of time with him to sort of make that. Again, I don't know how it's going to go down, if it's going to be infection, if it's going to be betrayal by brother, betrayal by daughter, but he's not long for this world, in my opinion, right? That's my guess. And I think it, similar to Robert, I don't know that we knew when we were watching Game of Thrones the first time that he was going to die so quickly. So it's kind of like, you're like, all right, well, we've been here. We got stuff going on in King's Landing. People are vying for the throne. Certain people want him off the throne. Oh, and now there's a hunt. Well, this seems like original. Flip side, we are getting way more time and a way more focused story than we had on even season 1 of Game of Thrones. Now, season 1 of Game of Thrones was largely focused on Ned, Daniel, as you pointed out, and he was definitely the anchor. But even with that anchor, there were so many other subplots happening with all these side characters and stuff happening at the wall and over the narrow sea. Like it really was sort of an octopus of storylines versus this, where this episode, there are really 2 locations with maybe 3 storylines happening. Like where the hunt, there's basically 2 main storylines, an A plot and a B plot. And then you have the C plot, which is actually, what's happening with Daemon and the sea snake. So there's a lot of benefits to that are really helping set this apart from Game of Thrones, which is more character development, more time with these people. You get to really explore the notion of ruling in a way that we didn't in Game of Thrones. Because again, I think with Viserys, as much as I like him less, the more the show goes on, the more I wouldn't say sympathy as much as pity I have on him, because he's a guy, in my opinion, who is clearly not fit to rule. And I think both they're showing that both with his actions, but even with the symbolism, as you mentioned, Daniel. Obviously, the throne's trying to kill him. The fact that his daughter was the one who found the white stag, while his men had to go capture a stag for him to kill, just so he could have a kill. All the show is telling us in so many different ways this guy is not fit to rule, and how that is taking a toll on him, where he feels this duty to do this thing he's really not fit to do. And I find that really compelling. I think it sets itself apart from Game of Thrones pretty well. I am really hoping this next episode shakes things up a little bit. Again, the thing about Game of Thrones is we know the hunt kind of marks the beginning of the end for Robert. I'm wondering, will we see a similar thing happen in episode 4 of House of the Dragon? Or is this where we start to really go in some different directions? Regardless, I say all that to say, this is really compelling TV. I love the focus. I love the character development and the production values, as Daniel mentioned, with the cinematography, but even the set design, the acting. It's really firing on all cylinders. And no, I know it didn't have a $465 million season budget, but it still looks really damn good. Probably better than pretty much anything else on TV that's not put out by Amazon right now. So kudos to the whole team there. And shout out to the director who also directed last week's episode, Greg Yataines? I don't know. I'm butchering that. Who also came back to direct this episode as well. So with all that said, is there anything specific I just want to call out here that sticks out to you about this episode from the others, or are we ready to move on to the recap?
Yeah, just to focus on what Daniel had mentioned too, is just I think the imagery specifically in this episode is very striking. We'll elaborate further when we get to those segments, but I think that sets this one apart, and it does. It feels like a more significant. It's no longer like just table setting. I feel like the first 2 episodes there was a bit more of the, trying to get the pieces in place. Where this is the first one where now it's like now things are just set forth in motion, and we get to watch as those unwind, and we're guessing a little bit more now, I think, too. And I think that's good. The intrigue in this episode starts to raise a bit.
We do, in fact, get a pretty big battle in the second half of this episode, which is pretty cool. And hey, turns out they still know how to do battle episodes, even with a different team.
Exactly.
Daniel, Stoll, anything else that sticks out to you about this episode?
No, I think Daniel pretty much covered that. I thought of, I was pretty positive when I was talking, but if I was going to levy some sort of criticism, I guess I would say I do wonder about these time jumps. We've already had a 6-month time jump from episode 1 to episode 2, and then a almost 3-year time jump from 2 to 3. I wonder how long they can continue to do that without starting to be like kind of what Daniel was mentioning, like how long can we keep that up without starting to lose a little something in the story. But I don't think we've crossed that line yet, but it's just something to be aware of as we move forward. But yeah, that's all I'd really say.
I'll come in here and just say I'm not willing to hold that against the show yet, because I think we're still in the early stages where we don't really know what's important and what's not. Like you know how it goes. Like in the early stages, you skip details. You're like, that seems like it would be important, but by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh no, like that stuff really wasn't important. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that we are still heading firmly in a territory. Like the reason they skipped that 2 years was for a reason. And I think it's because, my take at least, is they are focusing on the most significant day or days or periods in these people, the interactions these people have throughout their journey as a family, is my take. And as weird as it seems, because they made such a big deal about him having a male heir in the first episode, it seems weird that they would bypass that, but I think that's sort of the point. And he even talks about it in the episode, as we'll get into. So, I mean, I think they are really focusing on what are the major events in the family. And maybe the birth of Aegon, actually not that big of a deal in this story. We don't know until we get a little further along.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So as we noted here, as we begin our recap, we are nearly 3 years since the end of the last episode. Viserys and Alicent have had a son, Aegon. And this son is on his second name day, which means that, pretty much 3 years, right? Unless they popped him out on wedding night. I mean, the bare minimum is 2 years and 9 months, bare minimum time. So roughly 3 years, I would say, is a fair point.
Right.
And we start the episode with a little bit of a short prologue. The war for the Stepstone Islands, the thing that was set up at the end of our last episode between the Sea Snake and Daemon. And I gotta say, this was a pretty neat little skirmish, I think. We got to see Caraxes, Daemon's dragon, in action. We got to see the crab feeder feeding them crabs, but I love that I just love this random guy. I'm gonna insult you as much as I can, and you're gonna die. And then when Caraxes shows up, we get quite the sequence here. Let's just talk about it. What did you guys make? Was this an effective opening? Daniel Stoll, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it was a fun little intro. The thing that I took away from actually this whole little sweet sequence, and maybe, I don't know, I'm still going back and forth on whether or not I'm like reading too much into it. It felt like, especially considering the way this episode ended, but it felt like Daemon actually retreated fairly quickly. I don't know if that's me reading into things or not, but this is probably our first like major, battle sequence, which Game of Thrones is known for its battle sequence. And I think it was a pretty good introduction to seeing the dragons in action, flying over and just burning people alive. Something that we've seen before, but it was interesting to see how when it's more normal for these people, like, when we got it in Game of Thrones, it was like we hadn't seen dragons in 100 years. And so people had these like shock and awe responses when that happened. Here we get, a response from the enemy, like able to push Daemon off fairly quickly to where it sounds like they're actually winning at this point in the war for these last 2 years. They've been winning, even though Daemon has a dragon. So that was kind of cool to see, like just the difference, that people are accustomed to having the dragons around so much that they're able to actually, you would think that having dragons, you win, but that's not necessarily the case. And so that was interesting to see.
I'm glad you called that out. And, we can either talk about it here or later, but Guys, I mean, my question is, how did dragons not instantly grant them victory? And I think you pointed out, Daniel, it was people knew how to strategize fighting against a dragon, is what it appears to be. They're hiding in caves. Again, we'll get to that later. But I remember saying, like, this war's been going on for 3 years. How did they not, like, instantly win? Versus we saw how, Daenerys, like, just demolished King's Landing with her one dragon. Daniel Bowkepper?
Well, yeah, and it's that same thing because it seems like the crab feeder they have just been effectively pinned in the same area. So how, even if they could like outlast the dragon for a bit, you would think like inevitably the sea snake has a big enough naval force.
Couldn't they just box them in?
Yeah, no, right? And like and maybe they elaborated on that a little bit as to why they were wrong with that strategy, but I don't recall.
Listen. I recall in Game of Thrones, Daniel Stoll and Austin Lucari, and I can't remember who the guest was in that episode, really questioning Jon Snow's tactics in the battle for the Long Night, where you're like, wait, why did you send in your fiercest warriors first? Like, yeah. Game of Thrones has a history of very sketchy tactics, just to point that out.
They do. I will say, too, just another reminder, especially with Caraxes and just how much cooler the dragons look in this series, even over like Drogon, who, we see them develop and they become, they're better animated and they become quite a bit more realistic as the, Game of Thrones originally went on. But this, just right out the gate, we have a really cool design. He's just this like giant X in the sky. That's a destructive albatross circling overhead, even though he doesn't, the crabs fend him off pretty well. At least,
so it's crabby. It's the Krabby Patties he feeds the army.
He does. Yes. And, but overall, I also do like you were speaking about that gag of the character who I was thinking like, oh, this is how the Greyjoys get introduced. This is a Greyjoy or someone who's going to weasel his way out of this situation or get out of it, and it's going to be fine. And it's just that trope of this secondary narrator who gets a lot of time to talk just to be, immediately destroyed.
That is actually a pretty George R.R. Martin thing to do. If you've read the novels, he'll like introduce a character for a chapter and then kill them unceremoniously. And you do typically, the difference being you get the first person POV. So you typically get some key information when doing that we don't get in like a show where you're not inside their head. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is a tactic of like, oh, this guy's a big deal. Oh, he dead.
Well, yeah. And if anything, Sir Squashed by McDraggerson reminded us that you are inconsequential if you don't have a dragon or you don't lead a massive military force. You are largely inconsequential in this universe, and you are liable to get stomped out at any given time. And I think that's something that it's nice for fantasy series to remember.
Stomped out. Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Daniel Stoll, I have to ask you, if you were going to go, if Caraxes was going to kill you, because when we were watching the scene, that guy was boasting. He's like, you're going to die. I was like, you're about to get roasted. And I was incorrect. He instead gets smashed. Daniel Stoll, how would you rather go? Would you rather be lit on fire or smashed by a dragon?
I feel
important details.
I feel like smashed. I mean, I feel like it's quicker. I'm not going to be like, it'll be instantaneous. I don't know. Unless I'm close enough to the water where like I get caught on fire, but I could actually run to the water and put myself out. Yeah, I think the smashing is probably a little bit instantaneous. I don't have to be in torturous pain for several minutes.
Mm-hmm. Daniel Bowkemper, I mean, it sounds like you prefer the stomped method.
I'm team squished all the way. But another potential dragon death. It'd be pretty cool to get picked up by a dragon and just thrown
across the sea.
Seems kind of fun.
The possibility in this show for the deaths by dragon that we haven't even imagined yet are pretty strong. So I appreciate where your head's at, and we may see that later this season. Who knows? Who knows? All right, well, we move from there. We go on to Aegon's second name day celebration. So Viserys, immediately following this little prologue, is being pressured to intervene in the war for the Stepstone Islands because, apparently they are losing. Apparently Team Sea Snake and Daemon, the power couple there, are really losing hard, which, again, is just kind of bizarre to me that they're being beat that bad after 3 years with the resources. But hey, man, those crab feeders apparently are on to some stuff.
Yeah.
So Rhaenyra at this point also has grown disinterested of her father's whims. So she actually, at the beginning of the episode, her father is trying to shoo away people who were telling him what to do with the war. And Rhaenyra is in the garden she's really enjoying the melody of the bard who is playing music for her under the weirwood tree as she reads a book. Because, man, people in Westeros who read books are great. Until she is summoned personally by Alicent to attend the name day, and Alicent had to play her title card. She says, "Hi, I'm the CFO of this institution." And Bard, I know she just told you what to do. You listen to me.
Yeah.
And then the Bard, of course, acquiesces. So again, I'll start with you, Daniel Bowkemper. What did you think of this first interaction between Alicent and Rhaenyra? Because again, this is the first time they have talked on screen since they both stormed out of the small council room after, Viserys decided to marry Alicent.
Yeah, just to take like a real quick step back too. Do you think our phones, if they had emotions, they would get pissed off if we set Spotify to loop and just like, if they could have a say in what we constantly played over and over and over again?
So the bards are like Spotify?
He is very much like Spotify, and Rhaenyra told him
Bard
to
boy,
loop.
play my favorite song.
Right.
Yeah.
The one about the dragon.
Well, the AI sentience is coming, Daniel.
That's
so
true.
Can't be too careful.
Yeah, I know. I won't have to ask that question for much longer. I'll know. But yeah, I think it makes sense they'd adhere to formality. Now that where they're 3 years removed, I think some of the emotions have subsided. They have gotten not entirely comfortable, but at least acclimated to their relationship, and that they don't have quite the same friendship. I do think, and we'll see this throughout the episode with Alicent, that she still does care deeply about Rhaenyra, not just because she is required to by her position as queen, and she is her adoptive daughter, which is still real weird to think about right now. But there's a lot of other weird things we get to think about in this episode, and implications about relationships and how family structures can get very, very odd. But I do think it makes sense. But again, I just wish there was a few more interactions with them. I don't think what we see in this episode is enough to really get it would have been nice to see what brought them to this place and what, but we still get an inkling of that. We still get I think an allusion to it that even the way they've learned to live with one another it's still very tenuous, and something's got to give. I mean, there is going to be, I think, some emotionally jarring scenes, hopefully with Alicent and Rhaenyra. And I think this is just the very, 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 very early, ember of that.
Yeah, I think that's well said. You really don't like the shorthand approach they're taking here, it sounds like, or you're less positive on it. Again, which is, I feel like they are telling you what's happened without it being textual. It's the tone, it's the manner. Again, it does not fill in all the blanks.
No, and I do want to recognize that it's serving it's still obviously serving a purpose. Like they're and I think they will build to that ultimately. And they are building to that actively. It's just I don't know. I guess I'm already getting so attached to the characters this early on. But again, when we speak later on to Alicent, we do get to see her assume a bit more agency than what she's had in these last two episodes, which is virtually none. Really, it's get pressured by your dad to do something, go do it, and just.
Well, and that was really my big question. My big question in last episode, is we'll kind of get into throughout the discussion, is what is Alicent's perspective on this entire thing? Because she really was mostly a non-character up to the first two episodes, and no offense to her, but I think that was a very intentional choice not to give her a lot of scenes that allowed us to see the interior of what's going on in her, versus she just kind of is rolling with the punches. And I honestly was thinking, she has her own political motivations going on here. And that's not to say that she doesn't have some of that. However, this episode for me definitely clears up kind of what she's just trying to protect the status quo and do what's best for her in the situation. I don't think she's necessarily happy with the status quo. She's trying to help Rhaenyra. Exactly. She's trying to make Viserys happy. She's trying to, as a mother, serve her children while also protecting her own form of happiness. All of those things are true. So it is a fairly passive position, more passive than I expected. But I do think it makes sense. It kind of puts her in this sort of mediator position.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. And I think this scene, I know it's a lot from very little said, is sort of tipping her hand of okay, she's not unhappy with the overall status quo. I'm sure it seems she has regrets about the relationship she has with Rhaenyra and where that is, but she clearly still cares about her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Daniel Stoll, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you guys are kind of dancing all around it. I think for me, this scene it's interesting because I feel like Alicent is she feels very timid to me in the first 2 episodes, but I feel like we get a little more subtle. I mean, it's gonna sound weird, but subtle boldness out of her in this episode. I mean, just for her saying like, I'm the queen, leaves. To me, this is her just saying like she still wants to have a relationship with Rhaenyra. That's very important to her. And I think it's also important to her, and we get this is coming from a little of the scenes a little bit later, but it's also important for her that Rhaenyra and Viserys have a good relationship. And I think that's important to her. And so I kind of liked being able to see her sort of take that, have a little more agency that you guys are, even though it's small amounts at this point, being able to see that from her is exciting. I hope that she can continue to grow in that. And I think that she could really become an interesting character. I also will say the scene just made me kind of sad. I got a strong sense from the first 2 episodes that Rhaenyra and Alicent had a really strong bond. And to see
potentially even romantic, it teetered on questionably romantic relationship. Even.
Yeah,
right. And I think that it was sad to see that, Rhaenyra's resentment or disconnect, so much so that Alicent had to use her queen card to get them to have a conversation. That just made me feel really sad, and I hope that they are able to find a way to work past that and can get back to that friendship that they had, because it was a real potentially romantic relationship that they had, because I really thought that it was like a really touching, the bond that they seemed to have. And so I was really kind of saddened by the scene to see that that's mostly gone now.
See, Daniel, this is what happens when the patriarchy runs things. It destroys
actually,
relationships.
I was talking to my wife, Rachel, and she said, she was just like, damn it, men ruining 2 women's perfectly good relationship by the dumb decisions they make, is what she said. So definitely a little bit of that.
Accurate. Well said from Rachel. So the next thing we get here is the party is actually going to leave King's Landing. We're doing name day. It wouldn't be a proper name day without a hunting party. So we do get a quick scene inside the transport where Viserys confronts Rhaenyra about when she plans to wed. So this is basically... We get some vague allusions about this in the first scene, but this is where Viserys is like, yeah, so where's that, we love Aegon. He's beautiful. When's your baby coming? Oh, you're not married yet. Well, when's that going to happen? No pressure. It just, I think we can sort of talk about Viserys throughout the episode, but I think it's important that we talk a little bit again about his position here, because while I tend to like him less every episode, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I do find his position more and more compelling the further we get along with him. So obviously Viserys he holds his duty in very high regards. He's like, he even says later in the episode, I don't get to make a decision about what, like, the laws of man, gods and men, like this is how the world works. You need to marry somebody.
Not even I am above tradition.
Exactly.
Line, yeah.
Exactly. So he holds that in high regards. So Daniel Bowkemper, what did you make of Viserys' position here as he's starting to really push Rhaenyra towards quote unquote thinking about marriage? Better think fast.
I find reasons to. Yeah, I know. No sweat. Just maybe by the time we get back from this hunting trip, maybe you'll marry somebody. But we like it speaks. I mean, he's aloof in a lot of ways and is actually kind of reluctant to rule in some respects, but then also at the same time is still power hungry, still willing to make a lot of very severe sacrifices, maybe if not even for himself, just to preserve the Targaryen's place on the Iron Throne. And it gets to more of that utter desperation that, like, look, Rhaenyra, I get that this kind of sucks for both of us. I don't even enjoy it that much. Like, I don't even like it. I'm not, and I know he says that I'm not above tradition line a little bit later, but it's getting at that. It's working its way up to that point. And but he just feels like we have to, kind of abide by what we have. At the same time, he is contributing to the end and kind of leaning into that vision where this world, Westeros, won't accept a strong woman to lead them independently. Like she has to be attached to somebody. She has to be married. She has to be like, you can't even inherit the kingdom necessarily without this. Sorry, I didn't mention that condition of me claiming you to be my heir, but spoiler, I'm going to pressure you to marry whoever.
Which, by the way, I love that I think she calls that out a couple times in this episode.
She does.
Like, yeah, me being the heir doesn't matter. It's just lip service. I have literally gained no political influence whatsoever, despite that being my position.
Yeah.
And again, which we'll get, Viserys basically does come out and admit later, which we'll get to in more in depth, but he's like, yeah, the only reason I named her that was because I didn't want Daemon to have the title. Exactly. And again, it's just kind of like, again, Daniel, like your wife Rachel was saying, these men making dumb decisions and how they like negatively impact the lives of the people around them. And not only just the people around them, but the country, the city, the normal everyday people, because they make really dumb, egotistical decisions. Daniel, I mean, did you have any other thoughts on Viserys' position here?
Yeah, just a little bit to bounce off what you guys were saying. I think it's just a little interesting how, like in the last episode, Viserys is taking all these advice and pressure to marry, even though he kind of doesn't want to. And now he is doing that to his own daughter, which is just interesting how that carries on. When he was uncomfortable with it in his position, now he's the one being the, aggressor or whatever in that scenario. And we get this a little later, but I feel like he's also just a little bit, this is more of the pressure that he's feeling from other people, less his own decision-making, that is like kind of motivating him. He's annoyed with other people are telling him things that he doesn't want to have to deal with. So he's like, Rhaenyra, fix it so I don't have to worry about it. And one final point, I think that also kind of going back to what Dana was talking about and the whole like patriarchy and things. I think that Viserys, we talked a lot about this last week, where he's unwilling to make a lot of tough choices or be assertive as a king. It's interesting that when it comes to his own daughter, a woman, that he's a little bit more quicker to get to that point. So reiterating that patriarchy sort of control, like it's a lot more comfortable for him to do it to a woman versus like his brother, for example. So.
And also his kid,
true. Yeah, that's true.
It's a great way for him to pass again, but I would say it's easier for him to pass the responsibility of who she's going to marry off to her than it is for him to make a decision. You know what I mean? Like he can, like you said, Daniel, he can easily pass that burden off to someone else. If it was like his peer or one of his direct reports who aren't related by blood, he might not feel as comfortable just saying, you figure it out, you do it, versus his own flesh and blood. Listen, I don't get to decide. You get to decide. Or if you don't decide, I'm going to decide. It is kind of this weird toxic approach to decision making where he is afraid, and he kind of justifies it again by saying, but I want you to make a decision that's going to make you happy, but you also have to make it like right now. It's weird. And as we'll get into a little more complex. Now let's move on here. We are at the hunt. Once they get out of their fancy little carriage thing, we've arrived at the hunting grounds. Again, just want to reiterate, Robert Baratheon was one broke son of a bitch because he didn't have a hunting party half the size. His hunting party consisted of like 3 people walking through a CGI woods. I don't know if you guys remember that from season 1 of Game of Thrones. Fun fact, they ran out of budget for the hunt. Like apparently there was a hunt planned in season 1 of Game of Thrones, and that season 1 of Game of Thrones, they actually ran out of money for a bunch of stuff. They actually had a whole battle plan that got canned. And another thing that got canned was the boar hunt. And so there's literally the boar hunt in episode, I think it's episode 5 or 6 of season 1 of Game of Thrones, is like Robert walking around with Lancel Lannister as his squire, like, and one other person just walking around in the woods, and he's like, I'm boar hunting. And this one, it's there's tents, there's people, you've got lords from across the country here to celebrate, you got people providing gifts, like it's this huge thing. So again, I don't know, the out of fiction reason is them House of Dragon budget is a lot higher than Game of Thrones season 1 budget. But I guess you could, if you wanted to, project that to in the fiction, it being, they do talk about how Robert has basically squandered the fortune of Westeros and doesn't have as much money. So it kind of works out both in and outside of the fiction.
I like to think of it after watching this episode that during that, all I could think about, especially while we get the sequence where the white hart, or I guess the brown hart, the elk, is like tied down, and we have Viserys walking over to ceremoniously like kill it. And I want to assume that I know we didn't get to see that, but that is what happened with Robert. But his like drunken ass just like stumbles into the boar and just gets gored.
Well, that's that's what was implied. That was another thing that was really funny about Game of Thrones season 1.
So
Robert
bad.
gets killed by a boar off screen. Like they just hear about it. Oh, that boar got him. And you know what? And and they're like, we're gonna right the wrongs of our previous show. You want a boar? You want to hunt? Here it is.
Yes.
So again, that's just sort of my take on this new location. Daniel Stoll, what did you think about sort of the Game of Thrones vibes we got from the hunting ground? Was it a really impactful new setting for you?
It was cool. I was thinking like the whole time I was watching, I was like, man, if he freaking gets drunk and dies, I'm going to be so mad. Like they can't do this again. Like because that vibe was definitely there. But no, it was cool. And you could definitely see, like you're talking about the budget being a lot higher this time around. But yeah, I liked the setting, and I think it worked well.
All right. Very nice. Well, again, just a few details about the setting here. We have the wives and the nobles. They're sitting around in the tents gossiping about Daemon's progress or lack thereof in the war, while the men drank and prepped for the hunt and apparently flirted with the ladies. And you know what this means, guys? The Lannisters are back with a vengeance, baby. Casterly Rock is back into the fold. They're here to start making their play right now. They have to wait. It's a long haul for them, but they're investing right now.
Yeah, but fortunately, they have such a strong character to ensure their place.
Jason Lannister, the man can't help but strike out. Have our expensive wine, Rhaenyra. Here it is. Get drunk off our most expensive wine ever. Oh, would you like to come tour my luxurious rock? Wink, wink. I'll even build you a dragon pit. ... Oh, why? ... Oh, because you're gonna marry me, right? Yeah. Oof, this guy just can't win a fight for nothing, man. So real quickly, what did you guys think, Daniel Boatkemper? What did you think about the return of the Lannisters here?
Start with the dragon pit first. That's what matters. You don't come to the you don't start with the most important thing, or come in with the most important thing last. But the wine trade is big. Really, I can't remember where I was listening, but like I guess technically the Lannisters have the biggest. I mean, it's not really a naval force; it's like a shipping force. But they do have one
the
of
biggest ports. Lannisport is the biggest port.
Yeah. So they are still like significant. But I just. God, I love that the lead Lannister as of right now is just a doofus. Like that's such a good, I don't know. I was excited to see that. I thought we were going to get some kind of like, I don't know, maybe someone akin to like, what was it? Kevin Lannister? Was that the last Lannister we really got? The elder Lannister?
Yeah, that was Kevin Lannister.
Yeah, exactly. And I assumed that's what we were going to get. Nope, we get this idiot. And I'm so happy.
He's a twin idiot, by the way. I didn't write down his twin brother's name, but he has another twin here. So, I guess they come in. The twins must run really strong in the Lannister family, specifically of the Lords of Lannister. Daniel Stoll, what did you think of the return of the Lannisters?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it just made me like you were saying, he seems to be pretty much like a goofball. So I just made me miss, honestly, like Tywin. Like it made me think about like how the house is not the house we see here in the House of the Dragon is not the house that we have in Game of Thrones, and really that if I have my history right, I haven't read any of Fire and Blood, but Tywin does a lot for that house, from my understanding.
Yes.
So it was good to see that show up on screen, where it's like, this is not the Lannisters that you know, and it just made me think of like, man, I really did, despite how conniving Tywin was, I really did like him. That's what I was kind of thinking of the whole time.
Oh, Tywin Lannister. Incredible villain.
Yeah, he would not,
incredible villain.
He would not have allowed this to take place. Like, it would have been a much more succinct plan than just going and proposing marriage within the first couple sentences.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this in our preview episode for House of the Dragon, but the Lannisters before Tywin, there was several generations of them being the laughing stock of Westeros. I mean, they had like all this money, but they literally did nothing useful with it, was the joke. And then Tywin was like, no. We got the money, which means we get the power, which means why aren't we ruling? We get the biggest armies, so Tywin really does turn that house around quite a bit. Now, we do get a little bit of a fight here. Again, Viserys reconfronts Rhaenyra after Rhaenyra's like, yo, you pledged me to the Lannister dork over here? I don't like this guy. I don't care about this guy. And her father's like, yeah, girl, you got to get married. I don't make the rules here. And I'm going to make a scene right here in this Applebee's. Right here. We're going to talk about this.
Very public argument. Yeah.
And then Otto behind the Applebee's bar goes, yo, it's unlimited wings night. Why you guys fighting? Runs away, flees. She says, I'm done with this name day party. And then Sir Criston Cole, which as you may recall, who she selected to be her protector in the last episode, chases after her. Again, this is another great example of, we didn't see them form this bond in a relationship actually, but there's a lot that's implied in their very limited interactions in this episode that, hey, they know each other really well. They respect each other, and you kind of pick up the shorthand there. And then Viserys is again approached by Jason Lannister. Now, I will say this about Jason Lannister, and again, Jason to a core here, just very persistent, doesn't give up. He shows up and he says, "Hey, I'm not going to tell you that your daughter blew me off, but I assume whenever you name a new heir," and Viserys gets livid. He says, who said anything about naming a new heir? And then Jason's like, I didn't mean to assume, but I assumed because, male heir, and Viserys sort of just unloads on him about, it was a strategic decision and kind of goes through all these justifications. And Jason walks away and's like, all right.
Just trying to be your bro, dude. I just thought we were having guy talk. Here's a spear. Fuck.
My God, just
whatever.
Here's the golden spear to kill the stag. Okay, I don't want to go through each and every one of these interactions, but in a very short period of time, we get Viserys is, again, there's an attempt to persuade him to marry Rhaenyra off. First we get to Jason, who says, marry me. Then Otto, who's like, you're desperate. Well, let's keep this in the Hightower bloodline. What if your, 16 and 17-year-old daughter, what if she marries, your own 2-year-old son? Ugh. I know it's common practice in the Targaryen household, but ugh.
You thought.
And then Lionel Strong, again, who so far has probably been the most sensible character in this show that I've seen so far. I really like this guy. I know he hasn't had much screen time, but when he shows up, he makes a real impression. He's like, hey, remember how I told you should marry the sea snake's daughter? Well, I got good news, man. That ship hasn't sailed yet. Totally. Because you could pledge Rhaenyra to marry their son, Sir Rhaenyra Valerion. And the same thing could happen. So it's not done. You could still forge that bond that would politically set you up and this entire kingdom up for success. You could still do it, bro.
Listen, V, the Valerian bloodline, it's here to stay. Mm-hmm. They are so prolific. They're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. They're just...
God, there's so much broiness. I don't know if it's because there's a Jason talking to Valerian or because Lionel's last name is Strong, but man, this is a weird interaction they're having here. But anyway, I just want to get you all's take. Daniel Stoll, I'll start with you. What did you make of Viserys' sort of resistant to the proposals that are brought forward by Otto, Jason, and Lionel?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I do want to say one thing real quick before I say that. I part of me wants to like Viserys. Like, I kind of want to like him, but like, when he has the interaction with Rhaenyra where he kind of reveals that he like sent Jason to talk to her. I'm like, dude, talk to your fucking daughter, man. Like, what are you doing? Like, he just makes me so furious. He's done these things where like he has like, instead of just like talking to someone and dealing with it, he like ignores it and just hopes it works out. Anyway, that's my little rant for the podcast.
Again, that is the conflict averse nature of Viserys. And yes, friends, if you're a conflict-averse person, we get it. Conflict is scary and it's very hard. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But also just know for some people, they really like to just like talk about stuff to get it done. Move on.
Yeah.
Like
That includes Viserys.
this whole thing, like this argument they have, could have been avoided if he had just talked to her beforehand and had some sort of like dialogue. But I digress. That's my rant for the podcast. But in regards to the marriage proposals, it's kind of interesting to me. Like I said, I want to like Viserys, so I wonder if this is some sort of like care as a father that he's having, and maybe that's me trying to find something in him to like about him, because he's also being pretty defensive in a lot of ways about like with Jason when he comes to talk and say, you're assumes that he needs the son's going to be heir. He gets really defensive, like, no, that was not my motivation at all, blah, blah, blah. And as we know later, he sort of confesses that, yes, that his motivation was just to remove Daemon. So I feel like part of me wants to think that he actually is like, has a little bit of empathy for Rhaenyra, but then the other part of me says like, he's just trying to like, he's just being defensive and he doesn't want to come across as that guy, like, or he wants to appear as someone who cares more so than actually caring, I guess, is the other side of that. So that's sort of my takeaway from that.
Or maybe he does care in his own way, but he's not really listening to Rhaenyra about what she thinks. He's trying to make decisions that are simultaneously make his life a little easier, but also he can say, but it's because I care about her. But I'm not going to talk to her about what she wants. I'm just going to make a decision without talking to her.
It's like
and then I can sleep better at night knowing that I tried to help her.
Yeah, like it appears as like if he cares, but really deeper than that, it's just a convenience for him. Like that's where it comes from, and that's why I find him so frustrating. Because there is a level in there that I feel like there could be some goodness in him, but as much as I want to like him, the more I'm not liking him.
Mm-hmm. Daniel Bowkemper, what did you think about this swath of proposals we had here?
What's with Otto, like, really wanting just kids to get married? Like, increasingly younger.
Is increasingly creepy, dude.
I'm, like, thinking, like, the next episode, they're going to find out that, like, Alicent is having twins magically, and he's going to be like, my lord, you must betroth the twins to one another to keep the Targaryen line pure. I hope they don't try to continually raise the bar in that regard moving forward. But yeah, I also absolutely agree with what Daniel is saying. I mean, he is very defensive because Viserys is very defensive because he knows he's not in control of he is and he isn't. Like, he's really not. Everyone is clearly making moves around him and being very, very suggestive. Some of them in sincere, support or just trying to advise the king. Others, like I would say more Otto, trying to just, get their hooks in and keep them there. And Viserys realizes it all, but he's so, conflict adverse that he's not doing anything about it. He's kind of just letting it happen. There's a moment, we mentioned it already, where he's staring at the fire and he's like, I just named her heir because of I just didn't want Daemon to have it. Like, I'm, some Targaryens are riders, most Targaryens are dragon riders, but I'm a dreamer, and that's really who he wants to be, is removed from all of this. It's weird. It's like Rhaenyra, she doesn't really have daddy issues. She just has a daddy with issues, and he just kind of puts all those issues onto her. And it's like, deal with it. Like, he's really kind of the teenager. Like, he is the moody teenager of the relationship. But yeah, I don't know. I do think it just speaks to how he cannot make a decision for himself. Or he does, and they're bad. They're like, he always just picks.
He generally, I don't think this is true in this episode, but generally speaking, he has made almost every decision he's made has been the dumbest possible one he could make.
Yeah.
And I say that as in because I think that the worst part is he is provided with quality counsel oftentimes, and he just ignores it.
Yeah.
And he goes for what's easier and more convenient for him. And he basically says that in this episode. Later on when he's talking at the end of the episode, when he's talking to Rhaenyra, he's like, why, when I had to pick who I was going to marry, I picked the one that brought me the most comfort, and it was the easiest. He basically owns up to that. And, that's just the life he is. That's the kind of guy he is. He doesn't, I don't think he really wants to be king. I mean, I don't think he really wants to be king, honestly. Or if he does, he really is out of touch with what the job entails. He is not fit for it, absolutely. And I think this is actually going to take us right into. I mean, we can just jump right ahead to the scene where the drunken Viserys and Alicent speak about his dreams. He named Rhaenyra heir to take it away from Daemon, and he felt guilty for killing his. He admits to feeling guilty for basically killing his previous wife in pursuit of the male heir, which is, I will credit where credit's due. That's pretty big, because in the first episode, it was definitely like he was trying to downplay like how slimy to himself and others, how slimy the thing he did was. So again, it takes a certain amount of emotional maturity for him to at least realize that was probably not the best decision. I just was so obsessed with getting the male heir. And he's like, and now I have a male heir, and it was inconsequential. He even calls out, we were acknowledging earlier, like, okay, I had a male heir, and now I've got to make this big decision which relates to Rhaenyra. Do I marry her off? Is she still a fit for the heir? Did I even aim her heir for the right reason? All these really big existential questions he's having to come to terms with. He's made a lot of dumb decisions or erratic decisions that now he's like, okay, I realize that's what they are. What do I do with it next? And so I want to just turn it to you guys here, and I think from there we'll talk a little bit more about the stag. But Daniel Stoll, I mean, what do you think about this really introspective conversation we had between Viserys and Alicent?
Yeah, this is probably the most honest that we've seen him, or with himself, in the show so far. And yes, I'm glad to see that he takes ownership of his actions. But I don't know if it'll matter much going forward. For it to really stick, I think in the next couple of episodes, he would have to make some changes. Like, if he's really going to take this self-introspective, moment and look forward with a different perspective, I don't see that happening. So it's just like a moment that he has, but I don't know if it's going to change. Yeah, I just don't know if it's going to change anything, which I think is again, creates more pity and sadness for him, that he's even able to recognize some of the mistakes that he's made, but he's not willing to do the work to change going forward, or to do the hard work to make better decisions moving forward. I think we're still going to see the same Viserys going forward. So that is sad.
Mm-hmm. He's sort of like trapped in his own being, so to speak. He's in a position that he hates, but he's not going to do things to get himself out of the position. So you don't really sympathize, because you're like, well, man, I'd sympathize for you if you were actually trying to make the situation better. But instead, you're just sort of living with the fact that you're in this position. You've made people's lives harder. And I think the big thing, and I will discuss it more towards the end of the episode, is does he make the right decision related to Rhaenyra?
Right.
And I think that's where maybe the potential sympathy comes in. But otherwise, it's just pity.
Yeah, he's like wallowing in his own self-pity. Like, instead of actually taking that introspective and doing something with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel Bokemper, what did you make of this very sort of introspective scene between Viserys and Alicent?
Yeah, marticide is always the darndest. You hate to see it, especially when you regret it, which you should all the time. But except for Lisa Aaron, is it Lisa Aaron who? Lysa, excuse me. Who? She gets that shit down to a science in a couple hundred years. But either way, I absolutely what Daniel was saying. But on top of that, I think also this scene, it still does involve Alicent, and it's an opportunity for her to just absorb and understand how some of these Targaryens work. And I think that's something we see with her. While we do get to see her actually start to make decisions and actually be a more active character, I think this is also, one thing to observe is she is actually very privy to this very, very, very significant moment for technically the most powerful person in Westeros.
Absolutely.
And I would assume she's going to use what she's learning here and learning from these interactions, and hopefully use that to at least be able to protect herself as she raises, another potential, Targaryen ruler, and then also has to interact with others as, again, it seems to be, this felt like a soliloquy for Viserys, or at least at the same time, almost like a weird, like, I'm surprised he didn't mention something about like, I'm probably going to die soon at the end of this, because it just felt so close to his demise. Like maybe he is realizing things about himself, but it's either too late Daniel's correct though. If we do get another time jump, it just means, which makes it even more sad, is he's not going to do anything about it. He's just resigned to like accept everything the way things are. And yeah, I don't know. I do like that. Again, it speaks to why I like this episode so much, is just to get that introspection, to get that out of Viserys, and to get so much of that out of the king here, this specific role that we don't see too much of.
And I'm glad you mentioned Alicent, because I think this scene for me, I really like Alicent in this scene. I think this is where you really get to see, I think she really cares for Viserys. And I don't think she's, obviously she was put there by Otto, but I think she has developed a genuine care for him. That doesn't seem faked, like she's just doing it to protect herself. But I think there is some genuine care. And I think she really, really does care about Rhaenyra and her relationship with Rhaenyra, but also Viserys' relationship with Rhaenyra. And I think she is actually trying really hard to get them to like stop being disconnected and trying to get them to connect. Because I think, I don't know. So I really like Alicent here. I think this scene, maybe even more so than the earlier scene, is where we really get to see some of her agency, even though she is, not the king. It doesn't have the same amount of, control or power. It is her genuinely trying to make an impact on these relationships. And that's what she cares about.
Yeah, and I would say, especially in the later scenes, we're going to get to in a moment when they go back to King's Landing, I think you're actually seeing her do something with this information. The last thing I just want to call out here is, we get the idea from at the end of the first episode when Viserys tells Rhaenyra, hey, there's a prophecy. Aegon had a dream of the end of days and coming from the great north. We can, basically great evil's coming. He knew about the Targaryens fled Valyria because they knew about the Doom of Valyria. Apparently, if you go into the histories, they fled Valyria based on a dream, and then they start to conquer Westeros based on another dream, which is the White Walkers are coming. I mean, they don't say that explicitly, but this great apocalyptic thing is going to emerge from the winds of the north.
They refer to it as a winter, don't they? Or,
yes, yeah, exactly. So the Targaryens really do seem to take prophecy and dreams very, very seriously for a variety of reasons. And I think that's where you just see the pity, which is Viserys in a lot of ways feels duty bound to carry this out because he understands the weight of the task. And based off this prophecy, he understands why it's important for him to be in this position. But he also doesn't really want to be there. And I think and he doesn't want to deal with conflict. He doesn't want to make hard decisions. He doesn't want to pressure his daughter in any way. He just wants to party, have fun, get drunk by a fire,
Right.
Now, I think this all ties very nicely and interestingly into the scene where we see the kind of the parallels between Rhaenyra and Viserys with the killing of the stag. Because Viserys, ultimately, his entire party captures not the white stag that they promised him, but just a stag so they could have one for dinner, essentially to celebrate the name day. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra, after being attacked by a boar on her little side venture with Sir Criston, they discover the white stag, and whereas Viserys is like, oh, everyone's watching me, I guess I better kill this thing that I don't really want to kill. Clearly, he was uncomfortable in that entire situation. She just decides to let it go. So I'm just curious, what do you think? The symbolism here is very, very strong. Daniel Bokemper, you alluded to this earlier. Can you elaborate here for us? What makes this scene so powerful?
Yeah, and I want to bring up two scenes too, actually, related to Rhaenyra, and then the parallel scene with Viserys, where one is when Rhaenyra is returning from after killing the boar, and she just walks covered in blood. Everyone's looking at her like, what the hell happened to you? And she's just walking straight, and she's very unobstructed. She is everything I do is going to be looked at so much more intently than anyone else in this position. At least any man that was put in this position, it's going to be looked at 100 times more. The magnification is going to be 100 times more severe than anyone else. And then, so there's that, her already knowing she needs to carve her own path. But then when the White Hart does approach her, and there's almost this sense, her knight, the the common Dornish man, breaks, he starts to kind of ready a sword, like, oh, we need to take out this white hart. And of course she chooses not to, or tells him to back down. And it's kind of a reminder that she is going to go her own way. She's not going to adhere to this expectation, these traditions that the rulers should do that. Kill it, but let alone do it with all of the help of their full forces. Whereas Viserys, it's just, again, another reminder to what we were speaking to a little bit earlier about not being in control. Everything is already set up for you. It's easy. Just come out here and fucking do it.
But he also but at the same time, he hates it.
He does. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And he absolutely hates it. And there's just this tired, this fatigue on his face getting to it. And when he doesn't even kill the stag at first, he's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And he has to have the huntsman. I don't know which character it is that's pointing to, like, be like, right here, my lord, like, you need to shoot it. And he's like, okay, whatever. And he finally kills it. And he's like leaning on his staff and just exhales. And it's like, this is so dumb. This ritual. They're both, like, him and Rhaenyra, I do think, are a little bit upset and tired of tradition. But Rhaenyra actually has the gumption, and really she's pushed into a corner where she kind of, to really be who she wants to be and to assert herself while still being within this society, has to kind of break that hierarchy a little bit. Whether or not she can successfully, I don't know. But it's definitely just tells you how fundamentally different they are, in a lot of ways. But again, a really just masterful scene, I think.
Yeah, incredible sequence. Rhaenyra is definitely going to be, or at least attempt to be, a trailblazer, versus a sort of a slave to the mechanisms that have existed up to this point.
She's going to blaze some trails.
Blaze them trails with her dragon.
Yeah.
Daniel Stoll, what did you make of this sequence?
Yeah, I thought this was a great sequence, and I think there's a lot here that you could talk about. I'm going to try to summarize it quickly. I even think the boar is ties in a little bit, where you see, like, when she has a lot of anger, the way that she kills the boar. But I think that also just the way that, like you say in Viserys, it's all tied up. He just has to walk up, stab it, walk away. Doesn't want to be a part of that process at all. Whereas Rhaenyra has no problem, killing her boar in a much, more difficult situation. So just kind of showing her ability to make a decision in the moment quickly to take care of this difficult problem. Whereas Viserys has to, like, be kind of coaxed into actually going up and, like, doing it. So that in itself is a little bit of a compare and contrast there. And then, like you guys were talking about with the white hart, her, I think they said that it's sort of supposed to symbolize royalty, I think is the word that they used. And so I think it's interesting that she sees that, and she has a genuine, like, sees it as beautiful and, like, respectful of it. If she doesn't want to, like, control it or have power over it, she just wants to say, like, that's something that's beautiful and to be respected. And I think that might speak to her thoughts about the throne itself. Like, to be in that position, there's a certain level of respect that she can bring to that position, that goes right into what you were talking about, Caleb, with the visions and the dreams. I think Viserys, when he sees that it's not the white stag, is like, I feel like there's almost two things happening for him. Like, I think he's somewhat kind of disappointed in one way, but I think he's also relieved in another way that it's not the white stag, because, he had just been told by Otto, like, all these people, that this is what should happen with the marriage. And so when it's not the sign that this is supposed to be the great naming day or whatever, I think that maybe even plays into his decision to say to Rhaenyra later, I didn't get a sign, so you do what you want to do. I think that's even part of that process too. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot more you could say about it. I think it was a really well crafted scene. And yeah, it worked really effectively to communicate where these two characters are in their journey.
Yeah, well said. And again, just incredible filmmaking there. I just love it. I mean, I know some people would say, oh, that's capital S symbolism, but I thought it was I'd kind of forgotten about the white hart and the stag, like, because they brought it up earlier in the episode. So when it came back at the end, I was like, oh, this is really, really compelling and use of imagery. now. Now we do return to King's Landing after, we have again, after Rhaenyra brings the boar, as Daniel Bowkemper mentioned here. She's like, I'm not showing off, but I just brought you this boar. It's going to feed us tonight. Deal with it. Otto Hightower visits Alicent. And this is also interesting because this is the first scene we've seen the two of them together in since the first episode, in which Otto sends her to be in Viserys' chambers right after his wife dies. So Otto visits Alicent and then begins to pressure her to put Viserys to name their son the new heir, right? So Otto Hightower, again, assuming he has control over Alicent, and I honestly don't. I'm still unclear on what his degree of influence on her is, because she doesn't exactly do what he says, but he also could still play that card later, right? And Otto insists that Rhaenyra is a woman and therefore cannot hold any real power. And the other thing he mentioned specifically that just kind of really gives you some perspective into how he thinks about Viserys: you must guide Viserys to reason, because he'll never find it on his own. So really quickly here, I just wanted to turn it to you, Daniel Stoll. I mean, what do you like? What did you make of this specific scene between Otto and Rhaenyra?
I think that, obviously Otto is trying really subtly, but, working hard at trying to put, his family in as much power as possible. I do think it's, we sort of alluded to, like, even it's pretty gross how he gives up his own daughter immediately to go into the relationship with Viserys, and then is already suggesting that his grandson be married by at the age of 2. That's all gross, but I think it's just showing how, and we talked a little bit about this last week. I think he has a better understanding of Viserys than most other people. He is the most effective at manipulating Viserys.
Yes.
And so I think that's really what I'm getting from this scene, is he's using, Alicent, and we'll see if Alicent can come into her own autonomy or continues to sort of go along with what her father says. But he is the best at manipulating Viserys, and he understands, how to get to him. And so that makes him very scary.
It's all, man, Otto is so good at framing things in just such a way in which he kind of convinces people that they have. He's like, it's your decision. Like, I don't know how to say it. He frames scenarios and decisions in ways that, the people still feel like they're making the decision on their own, but he sets it up in such a way that there's only one real right decision to make. And that's pretty potent, especially to someone like Viserys, who really just wants the decisions to be easy as possible. Daniel Bowkemper, what did you think about this exchange?
Yeah, and I may be reading a little too into it, but I think it's a moment, at least with what we see with some of the scenes that follow, that Alicent, she's doing what her dad says, but we are also seeing her become quite a bit more mature, and I think she's not quite taking it all. Especially, I think she may get rubbed the wrong way a bit by that. He has another line. The one you mentioned is great, that, Viserys has to be guided, but also it doesn't matter if Rhaenyra was, what was the character? It was like Yohara, an ancient important ruler, but I think it was like Yaharis or something, but it doesn't even matter if Rhaenyra was he himself or the reincarnation of him. It wouldn't matter. Westeros will not accept her as a woman, let alone a single woman ruling. That's just the way it is. And I think I would suspect that Alicent is like, I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. And I think the next scene we see that kind of unfold. But it is a reminder that, yes, Otto is very manipulative. He does. That's a great way of putting it. He does make it seem like it is the only logical, the only logical choice is the one he's laying before you. But it's also at the same time, very clearly, he has built this idea of, both tradition, but also traditionally patriarchal.
And patriarchal in a way that only specifically benefits him individually.
Yes.
He always does that without, he never brings him into it, but he's always framing things with options that only benefit him.
Truncates himself. Yeah. But coincidentally, best case scenario for me if we do all of this. But yeah, it's but he just has that veil up just enough to make it seem like I am just being, a guiding hand. I'm just being counsel, for the king, which is my job. And my job for everyone here is the hand of the king. And, but no, he clearly is playing the game very hard. I think it's a reminder. And again, we'll see it more in the scene that Alicent is actually empathetic, more so than him, but whether or not she's just going to ultimately fall in or continue to fall maybe into the same entrapments that every woman is kind of subjected to in this situation of where the men are really going to have all the say ultimately. Like we're just going to kind of position you. I don't know, but I see that break. I see that schism here between her and her father.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting to see how that plays out. We get, I think, a little glimpse into it here in a moment. Before we do, though, I just have to stop, guys. I don't do this very often on this show, but I just have to call something out in which they made a creative decision that I'm not here to judge anyone, but it made it very hard for me to take this scene seriously. Did you guys notice the art on the walls behind Alicent, specifically when she was talking to Otto, and what was going on in that art? I just want to pause it here, and for listeners, I just want to throw this out there. I'm watching the scene. It's a very dramatic scene. Otto, Alicent, back and forth, the close-ups. And then Lauren, my fiance, leans over and says, Is that an orgy in the art happening behind Alicent? And I see it, and then we both just start laughing. And it is, in fact, an orgy, a piece of art that is demonstrating an orgy that is behind Alicent. And it's not like fuzzy or blurred out. They're not, or doing a rack focus or anything. No. It's clear as day. So it made it very hard to take that scene as seriously as I think it warranted because of a very weird set design. So I guess what I'm saying is the Targaryens really like to party on, so much so they hang it on their walls. Is all I'm putting out there.
Yeah, they're when I rewatched it, there was like kind of two different angles I could see it at. If it was supposed to symbolically mean anything, maybe it was just for fun. But like, I don't know. But I mean, Viserys' rule is kind of a clusterfuck right now. Everything seems like kind of a clusterfuck. So maybe that's speaking to that a little bit, but also to have Alicent have it framed behind her like, oh, by the way, you're here to make more heirs. You're here to be this like, this sex factory for right now, for specifically Viserys. So no, not in orgies or anything like that, but like this is a reminder of what you do. We all have our roles here. Women aren't allowed to actually rule meaningfully. We only name them as heirs as jokes, and when we hate our brothers, we don't give what you get to do. What you get to do is you get to have sex and give birth and be a lady of leisure and gossip and not do anything important. And like that's kind of where I thought maybe that's what like just because it was behind Alicent, right? So it was like
it was like directly behind her.
Yeah.
If you don't see it, that's great. Once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it.
But I think it does in some ways add to it, but at least what Otto is saying, which is like you are subject to this system behind you. There's your future.
I really appreciate that you're
I'm trying.
You're
I don't
going for it. No, I do, because it's not that I'm trying to be like immature or anything. It's just it's like why would anyone hang that on their walls? And you're suggesting it's because it's a way to reinforce the culture. Which, hey, again, I don't think you're wrong. And that with that train of thought, Daniel Stoll, what did you make of this?
Yeah, I actually didn't see it when I on my first watch through. Totally missed it, and then Caleb pointed it out, and I regret that he pointed it out to me. So I hadn't put much thought into it, but I think what you're saying, Daniel, is that I mean I can come up with anything better, so I'm gonna go with that.
Awesome. It's a way for the men in the society to reinforce the patriarchy, and that women are just designed there to have sex and have babies.
They're there for their pleasure. Yeah.
There we go.
That's right.
Exactly.
There we go. The gods of tits and wine would be proud, as Tyrion Lannister would say. All right. Now, here's another thing here. We do get to see that Alicent visits a sobered up Viserys now. We see him drunkenly talk about his dreams and the prophecies, and now we actually get to see Alicent deploy, I would say, some of this information in a meaningful way in this conversation by offering him advice on Rhaenyra's marriage proposal. And again, I just want to circle back. Something we've already talked about a little bit in the show is Alicent. We really haven't gotten much on her point of view in all of this. And so I just want to turn to you, Daniel Stoll. I mean, what do you take with, on her? What's your take on her relationship with Viserys and specifically her perspective on Daemon and Rhaenyra in this conversation?
Yeah, I jumped probably a little ahead earlier when I kind of talked about this already, but I think this is really the scene where you get to see how that she really does care about Viserys, and that she really does care about the relationship that he has with Rhaenyra, and she just seems to like actually have just genuine care for people and their relationships. So she wants to see this family flourish that she is now a part of, and so it was really nice to see that from her. I want to see more. That develop more. I hope that, Otto or Viserys or someone doesn't sort of halt her from being able to do that. I want to continue to see more of that from her. So I hope that continues.
All right. Daniel Bowkemper, what did you make of this? I mean, it may be one thing we haven't hit on so deeply here is especially what she says about Daemon.
Yeah, no. And she says that it's logical. I don't even remember if she passes much of like a character assessment on Daemon, but in a way to what Daniel's speaking to is it's a way to show her care for Viserys. Like, well, Viserys, if you just let Daemon lose, that he is still a Targaryen. He is still a very prominent Targaryen. And if they just get destroyed with a dragon on their side, the thing that's supposed to make Targaryens awesome, and the reason we kind of fear them, if you just let him lose and let him flounder and squander all of that, you are vulnerable by extension. At this point, it's too far gone. Whether or not it was the right thing for Daemon to just do it or do whatever the hell he wants, partially out of being upset by not being named a heir, it doesn't matter. At this point, you are stuck with a decision. And I think like she, even more directly than a lot of the council, is very much like giving him straight advice. And then at the same time, looking out for Rhaenyra, saying you should let her make her choice. You don't need to present these choices with her. She is sharp. You named her heir for a reason. Let her do that. So I think she is kind of carving her own way. She's actually looking at it and she has a cooler head. She's not as emotionally attached she is emotionally attached, but she's not emotionally attached to a lot of things that are going on in the sense like, what are the political implications and this and this and that. She does genuinely just care about them and like, Viserys, this is what you need to do to solve this. And then at the same time, you need to mend your relationship with your daughter, telling her what to do and then making it seem like the decision you made truly was superficial because yes, maybe you did at the time name her as an heir just to spite Daemon, but it doesn't have to continue to be that. It doesn't have to be that. You can prove that decision was more than that. And if you're actualized enough to recognize it as such, then you can do things to change it now, like allowing her to be her and allowing her to grow into the ruler that she, needs to be, hopefully a better one than you. So yeah, I don't know. I think a very big win for Alicent in this situation. And I'm glad we're seeing it. I hope we get more of her. I'm sure we will, but I hope it doesn't get that fire of hers, even though she's not a Targaryen. She's a house tower or high tower. I hope she doesn't become, stomped out.
Daniel Bowkemper, I hate to say this. This is Westeros we're talking about.
I know.
And while I've already told you, I've already made the bold prediction. I think Viserys is definitely dead this season, if not like halfway through the season or earlier. Yeah. I don't think Alicent Hightower is too far behind him, especially seeing that she seems like a very nice, good person. That is a double whammy for loss right there. I mean, she is not signed up for success to thrive in Westeros.
No, not at all.
Especially once she loses Viserys' protection.
Yeah.
I'd also like to point out in this scene, maybe you could see it earlier, but this is the scene that I caught it in, is that you can actually see that Viserys has lost 2 of his fingers. So continuing to... the maggots did not work last episode, and if, in fact, it has spread to another finger, so he's losing those digits pretty quick.
This next episode, he just doesn't have an arm, and they don't say anything about it. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. It's funny. It's one of those things. I mentioned this before we started recording. Initially at the early in the episode, I was like, "Oh, what's his hand gonna look like?" And I noticed he was wearing gloves a lot. But then I totally just forgot about it, and they don't call any attention to it in this specific episode. It's just one of those things that are letting play out. So Daniel Stoll, I'm glad you brought that to our attention. Yes, it is still taking a toll on him sitting on that Iron Throne, and it's something we must not forget. Last scene in King's Landing here for the week, we do see that Viserys summons Rhaenyra to his chambers where he reveals that there's a very lengthy conversation. We can dive into it further if you would like, but essentially he's saying she's got to get married, but he's not going to tell her who to get married to. And that there is a duty she must uphold, but also he's not going to make decisions for her either. So again, kind of that, on one hand, it's like, yeah, he's empowering her, but also it allows him to not have to make a decision and to pass it off to her, which I find kind of interesting in there. So just really quick, I mean, who do you guys think she's going to choose from? The way the scene ends, I definitely feel like it's setting up for her to make a choice, maybe even by the next episode, if we're seeing these time jumps occur as they have. Daniel Stoll, what'd you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure where she's going because, I mean, we've even talked about a potential romantic feelings for Alicent with her. So, you know, I don't know if that would be her motivation. You know, we don't even know if, you know, who she's interested in. So if she's going to make a choice, I feel like she is the type of person to not make a choice based on who she's attracted to, but rather on what makes the most sense for her. So in that case, I could see her potentially, you know, making the choice to join families with Valyrian. Is that
Yes.
I could see her choose
Valerion, whatever. It's close enough.
I could see her making the choice to join with the Valyrian family. That seems like she seemed to agree with that logic last episode for Viserys. So maybe it makes sense that she goes that way because I think she's going to be a lot more pragmatic if she is going to get if. I'm not even 100% convinced she is going to make a choice, but if she is, I feel like it's going to be much more political and pragmatic than it is about any sort of feelings or attraction or anything like that.
All right. Daniel Bowkipper, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I just kind of piggybacking off of Daniel's comments. I lean towards her not making a choice ultimately. I think that's less likely. Or if she does, the choice really doesn't matter. It's going to be not to, you know, again, hop back into the core series because this is different, but think of Daenerys and her, you know, marriages that I think at least one, that I can remember that she had, and that didn't matter. The character didn't matter. It was all just out of convenience. And I think it might be that. We haven't seen this Valerian prince yet, but I know he's relatively young.
No, he actually doesn't appear. He does appear in the,
really?
yeah, at the discussion table where they're discussing the strategy. There are three of the Valerian families. He's the youngest one.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's him. Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, like, they don't call it out, though.
No, I didn't realize that was him. Okay. But
he's not a 10-year-old.
Yeah, that's good. That's a step in the right direction. Jeez. Lay out, Otto. God. But he, I don't know. I think it'll be pretty, if she does choose somebody, it might be kind of inconsequential, but I think she wouldn't. I think she would rather be her own ruler, establish her rule. Maybe she'll choose a husband while she's queen. I don't know.
I think she's going to be Miss Pragmatic. I think Daniel's right. I think it's going to be a decision purely out of political gain.
Yeah.
And I think, so one thing, just, I watched firstly, if you don't watch the behind the scenes after the episode, they have a short version that usually auto plays after the credits roll on the episode. But they actually, if you're watching this via HBO Max, if you go to the individual episode menu, they have like a 20+ minute version of that same thing where they go way more in depth on it. And Ryan Connell sort of described this episode as a coming of age sort of for Daemon, Rhaenyra, and Viserys, which is kind of interesting because obviously Daemon and Viserys are both grown men in a lot of ways, but they are having to kind of grow out of these preconceived notions in order to take the next step in their character journeys. And I think for Rhaenyra, my interpretation of what they were saying there is that she's going to, I think she's going to get married, but I don't think it's going to be a loveless marriage. I don't think she cares. I think it is going to be purely out of political gain. She knows what she wants. And she and her father, for better or for worse or for whatever reason, is giving her the ability to make that decision herself. And she can either be upset about it or she can use it to her advantage. And I think she will use it to her advantage is my take. Therefore, I tend to agree with Daniel. I think she's going to decide to marry with House Valerion, but we will see. We will see. I'm honestly not sure, mate, because I also think it's just as likely that she doesn't, by next 2 episodes, she hasn't made up her mind yet. So we'll see. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the final piece here, which is the battle at the Stepstone Islands. So, guys, just in case you forgot, Game of Thrones is also known for big battles. We get a battle. We've never seen a big, huge battle on a beach in islands, which is kind of cool. So we see Corlys Velaryon, a.k.a. the Sea Snake. His army appears to be running out of resources despite having a dragon. We've already talked about how improbable it is, that why... Daniel, you raised a great point. Why don't they just use the Navy to lock the crab feeder into that island and then use the dragon to roast them out or starve them out? I don't know. I'm not a tactician. I have no military mind, but I'm having a hard time understanding how an army with the dragon and the best naval army of Westeros is somehow losing. But we're just gonna say, forget it. We've already talked about it. It's just weird. It's a weird decision. Now here's what's more interesting. Viserys does decide that he's gonna send. He does decide to send troops, and he does so via a letter. He is going to send troops and supplies and ships to support Daemon's victory because he does care about him. In which case, Daemon reacts by beating the shit out of, if not killing, the messenger who delivers that, and says, you know what? The best plan we have is a suicide mission. We're doing the suicide mission. I would rather be the suicide bomber than accept help from my brother.
Daemon, we've done the suicide mission 198 times and we all died but you. We need to stop the suicide.
The 199th time. That's the time we're going to do it. Time.
Yeah. I want to believe he's just been conducting the same raid over and over and over and over again. And so can we use some of these ships to just circle them a little bit? No, we have a dragon.
We have a dragon. The dragon will do it. So real quick, Daniel Bokemper, what did you make of this? Firstly, what did you sort of make of Daemon's reaction to the messenger and then this overall sequence?
If you are a medieval messenger out there, just drop the letter and run as fast as you can. From whoever you're delivering it to.
It's true. A lot of messengers in Game of Thrones tend to die.
Yeah, they do. Not a good lot. Not a lucky lot, I should say. But yeah, we didn't get that much intensity since King Leonidas I mentioned earlier. I'm kind of surprised he didn't position. He's like, can you come over this cliff for a second? Can you sit there, messenger? Can you sit? And then just kicks him off and is like, this is Stepstone Island or whatever. But yeah, he is clearly very immature. He is very upset. Daemon's weird because there's parts of me, like when we saw that moment at the end of the last episode or near the end where he got his bluff called out and he's like, I'm not, he takes off his gloves and he just sits down and he's just kind of just dejected and but he's also a little bit it doesn't really matter. It's whatever. You get more of that there, more of this, he's childish, but he's not as and he's bullheaded too, but he still listens to some extent as long as you're, pro him, I guess, such is the case with House Velaryon is very much in his corner. But even they seem to quickly question the value of Daemon. And to that end, only see him as his connection to the throne as what's being meaningful. But yeah, I do think we get, again, more shades of Daemon. We get the crazy psycho killer side of him, but then we also get the very he's aware that he's making mistakes. He's aware that he's doing something wrong and that he has to kind of break this cycle. He's not going to be perceived as anything that matters. They might be right to cast him out. Maybe he shouldn't be there if he can't get this done by himself. And yeah, so I get his frustration, but Messenger didn't do anything. Just let him be.
It's messengers, man. I don't envy them in Westeros. They either become they're killed, they become political prisoners, as we saw in Game of Thrones. It's not great. Yeah. Daniel Stoll, what did you make of both the reaction to the messenger killing and also this overall sequence here?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, his rash. He seems to be rash, or when he is feeling angry, and I think that for me, he is not, under any circumstances, going to allow his brother to have any of the credit for what goes down here if it is successful. And so that's why he turns to this suicide mission. 100% he should have died. Lucky for him, they have some stormtroopers up there on the side of the cliff shooting down those bows because they missed quite a few shots that should have not missed.
Pretty bad shots.
They still managed to hit him in the right shoulder, though. Doesn't he get shot twice?
Yes, he does get shot twice, which is at least makes it somewhat more believable. Because at first I was like, they've shot 50 arrows and they've missed every single one. But no,
it's the hair, the long white hair just blinds them.
I guess so. But yeah, he's basically on a suicide mission, but yet he comes out with blood, but like as far as we can tell, like he comes out pretty unscathed, seemingly. I mean, he's like walking and functioning when he walks out. So I think it just shows how far he's willing to go to not let his brother have any of the credit. Like he is like, before I let him get credit for this victory, I will like die. That's really what the sequence was for me. And yeah, like, he baits them all out of the cave so the dragon can come and destroy them all. But then he also goes into the cave, full sprint and takes out the crab feeder, slices him in half, actually. So
pretty brutal fashion. Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, that's the big takeaway is that he is going to have all the credit. And I think he comes away like, we'll get into this a little bit when we do our like wrap up, but he's looking really good, I think, after this. I mean, he's essentially a war hero now at this point. Like this is like a legend that you sing songs about. Like he went in, dodged hundreds of arrows, took out all these men on his own, took out the crowd, this is a legendary performance by him. So I think that this hurts Viserys too, because now Daemon seems to continuously grow in status every episode, I think.
It's definitely one of those where he rolled a lot of nat 20s.
Yes.
I mean, like consistently, including his luck where the other dragon rider just showed up just in time to roast those guys. Yeah, I think this is a neat little sequence here overall. It was just a reminder that they know how to make these on Game of Thrones. It was great seeing the dudes get lit up by dragons. I do appreciate they did a different set piece, not one we've been on before. And at the end of the day, crab feeder just tasted like crab legs, more like it, just crispy out. Not really a lot to back up his epic intro that we got last episode, which takes me to my last question before we put a pin in it here. I mean, in last week's episode, listeners who tuned in may remember that our guest Harold Story specifically was like, I hope, his exact words were something like, I hope they didn't just introduce this guy in really badass fashion just so he can die next episode. And, that is absolutely what they did. And I just have to say, are you guys at all disappointed, or was this what you were expecting? Daniel Stoll?
Yeah, I actually think it is a bit disappointing. Not only did he die the next episode, he didn't even get a line. Like, he didn't even say a thing. Like, and they did feel like they were sort of building him up to be this sort of like, according to the House of Valyrian, this is a very important piece of shipping. So perhaps this guy's really smart, and the way that he's tackling this, his approach to all this stuff. But no, he's just some guy who likes to feed people to crabs, I guess. I don't know. So it is a little bit disappointing. Not that we didn't even get a line from him. So yeah, I think it's just disappointing. But I also don't think it ruins the show, or it takes away anything from the show at the end of the day, because the things I'm actually most interested in are, the relationships between Viserys, Daemon, and Rhaenyra and their family dynamic. That's the most interesting part for me. So it is disappointing, but at the end of the day, I don't think it really affects my overall enjoyment of the show at the end of the day.
Sure. Daniel Bowkipper?
Yeah, 100%. It's disappointing, but it doesn't ruin the show or anything. I just think it feels weird that they like bookended the last episode with this is a big deal, and then they bookended this episode with how much of a not big deal it really is. And I mean, it's a big deal for Daemon. It matters for Daemon, but the character himself, the crab feeder, he doesn't even get the cool, like when he's, I thought it was what's most telling about this the way he's set up and the way he's destroyed is you don't even get the, like, it's not like Daemon walked out with like his decapitated head and like lifted it above the crowd. It was like, and everyone's cheering. He's just dragging out like half
a torso.
half a torso by its arm, just walking casually. And it's like, crab feeder, ladies and gentlemen. And not even missed opportunity. There weren't even a few crabs munching on him while he was dragging his body out. I thought that would have been funny to, like, I don't know, some poetry in there.
Listen, guys, I just want to remind everyone, there was a lot of people who were pretty disappointed in Game of Thrones that the Night King never got any lines or any sort of like real dimension to him other than evil incarnate. This feels like another one of those, and I gotta say, I don't like it. I don't like it. If you're gonna make a big deal about introducing this character, I feel like it goes against what makes Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon interesting, which is there aren't, generally speaking, just flat characters. Give the guy one monologue. Make him creepy voice. I don't know.
These crabs is all I got.
And
these crabs is my life.
And if you can't, and if you can't do that, just don't ride him. Don't just make it very clear he's not that big a deal. I understand, Daniel. I think the reason they did it was because it is a big deal to Daemon, and they needed to make the threat feel very real and viable.
Yeah.
It just felt somewhat tropey and a little bit lazy for my taste. And it was awful that we predicted it in last episode. We're like, wow, it sure feels like they're going to build this guy up only to kill him in the next episode. But surely they wouldn't do that. And they did. Not great. But at the end of the day, not a huge deal. I don't think it ruins the show or anything. Just feels like uncharacteristic of... more characteristic of the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones and less characteristic of like season 1, 2, 3, 4 of Game of Thrones, right? All right, gentlemen. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our recap of the show here. Man, this has been such a lengthy, fun conversation here. As part of a segment this season, we're wrapping up each episode by awarding honors to various characters in the episode. So, as always, we're going to do who wins, who loses, and who is the biggest wild card player. Daniel Stoll, starting with you.
I think I kind of already tipped my hat a little bit on this one. I think this week's winner is Daemon. I think that he's going to come out of this looking really good, especially compared to where we started, where he was, killing and castrating people in episode 1. Now he's saving the entire war single-handedly almost. I feel like this is going to lead to him having, being able to have a lot of leverage coming up in the next couple of episodes. And so we'll see how that goes. So I think this week that Daemon's this week's winner. The loser, I actually am going to cheat. I'm going to have 2. I'm going to say the messenger is the loser, and the crab feeder is a loser. Like, we didn't get a line out of him, we didn't get nothing. So I think he's a big loser too. And I'm actually going to go with for the walker. I'm actually going to go with Rhaenyra. I think that she's starting to really find her place a little bit, and so I'm really excited to see how she continues to grow and develop, and how she's going to play, what role she's going to play as these dynamics continue to grow. All
right. Daniel Bokemper, who are your picks?
Yeah, so for the winner, I think it's pretty clear. As Daniel was saying, Daemon, for sure. I mean, he. I will say this: the time skip helps in that we didn't get a few episodes of him not doing what he set out to do and just struggling.
Apparently, 3 years of losing.
We just get the implication, yeah. So in a lot of ways, he's a loser, but on this day, he won. So yeah, his definitely his platform is raised. Did already see. Well, you'll mention the name of the next episode. I think it has a little bit to do with Daemon, maybe just a tad. But he definitely won. As far as the loser is concerned, yes, poor crab man. Who's going to feed the crabs now? What's going to happen to them?
No one in the entire world of Essos or Westeros will feed the crabs.
The crabs are the dragons of the sea. They are sacred. We need to protect them. Or not.
This is a separate podcast. I did actually look up this week, are there flesh-eating crabs? And turns out they don't look anything like this, but there are in fact crabs that have been known to eat flesh, such as small animals, not necessarily humans, but they could eat humans. Coconut crabs, look them up. They're terrifying.
They're way bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like 3 feet long. It's crazy.
Jesus. I never want to encounter one in my life. But the other biggest loser, Jason Lannister, is lose. I'm just going to pick him every day, regardless of how
that's
well he does. I mean, the Lannisters have some kind of longevity, so I guess we'll see them there. But I think the wild card, I think Alicent. I think she's going to come into her own. I think she's getting a little bit better at this whole Thrones game, and I think she'll at least make some interesting choices. I think she's going to be a part of some meaningful interactions. And I do hope, at the very least, for the sake of her character, she maintains her empathy, even if she gets killed, as most of them do eventually. But yeah, it's my wild card. It's going to be Alicent.
Alicent. Okay. Well, here's what I got. Yes, I am in line with the Daniels. I am too picking winner Daemon Targaryen because, yes, again, I'm not going to repeat it. He did an awesome thing that is like legendary. It's iconic. Like people are going to talk about this. I mean, in fact, we know they talk about this for generations to come after the fight. So he wins. Loser. I love the pick of the messenger, Daniel. That is very, very considerate of the facts that he actually got killed just for delivering a message. For
just doing his
delivering
job.
the mail.
He's just doing his job, man.
I'm going to go with Viserys. Why? Because I have so much pity on him, and it's not really becoming to have pity on a king who clearly doesn't want to do his own job. So there's that. This week's wild card, I'm going to also side with Daniel Stoll and say Rhaenyra here because I think I am on she's the Trailblazer Queen Yas this week, and I genuinely don't know what she's going to do next, and that is very exciting. And what better wild card than something I don't know how to predict. Lastly, I want to give a special award for the week here. This week's special award is Best Unexpected Product Placement. And guys, I have to say, the Peacock product placement on a competing streaming service was most impressive. Did you guys catch that?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
There's a shot that lasts about 3 seconds of a peacock. When they enter the hunting grounds, there's a peacock walking around, and you get like a close-up of it for a few seconds.
And they didn't kill it. That would have been the statement, though. That's
what I'm saying. HBO, why did you give your competitor free product placement on your streaming service? I just give kudos to Peacock, the streaming platform.
They're not afraid.
No.
They're like, we will gladly advertise you.
How much money did they pay Miguel for that? How much?
Enough. That was a $50 million Peacock we just saw.
But not to HBO, to Miguel Sapochnik, who just turned a blind eye.
True. Oh.
Maybe his leaving now is a little more suspicious after this episode.
That's why they fired.
Interesting choice. Yeah. We don't have time to edit it out.
The arrival of the peacock. All right, gentlemen. Is there anything else you'd like to add about House of the Dragon episode 3, second of his name?
Oh, I don't know. I do wish we got some crabs on the arrows of the crab feeders, like they shot arrows with crabs on them. That would have been cool.
And then they when the person gets stabbed, the crab's
already eaten, already feeding on him. That would have, I don't know. That's about it.
So much potential, so much lost potential there.
Right. This episode sucks.
No crab arrows.
No crab arrows. Idiots.
Daniel Stoll?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything.
All right, cool. Well, just a quick snapshot because we are pretty much out of time here. The title of the next episode is King of the Narrow Sea. And as Daniel Bowkemper implied a moment ago, that's probably talking about Daemon. I think he's getting an episode named after him. Daniel Stoll, what are you expecting or think we may see next week?
Yeah, I think that we're going to see Daemon use the clout that he has now gained from this episode as leverage to continue to rise in station. And it'll be interesting to see. Probably the person I'm most excited to see respond to all that would be Rhaenyra, because I feel like their relationship does have so much respect, but obviously they're slowly building to differing sides. So I'm going to be interested to see how she responds to all of that.
Or are they building to being on the same side to overthrow Viserys?
Who knows?
That out there.
Someone knows, but not me.
Mm-hmm. Daniel Bowkemper, what do you think?
Isn't a narrow sea just a channel? Or I know it wouldn't be a river, but it's not. When does the sea stop?
It's not that narrow, Daniel. It's actually pretty wide.
It's a pretty wide. It's okay. Yeah. All right.
It's a pretty wide, narrow sea.
I guess it could be a sea because they're calling it an ocean. So that would be a step too far. A narrow ocean doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's a real question. Daemon is he's absolutely not going to get a big head about his victory. He will not do something brash again. The messenger was just a kind of a slip. We all want to kill a male person every once in a while when they flee, especially if you get like subpoenaed or something. So I get that. He will absolutely not do anything crazy and not cause any kind of a conflict with Rhaenyra. And if he does, he will be he'll have reasons that are real and not.
It is a good thing none of those
Howdy.
things are going to happen next
No,
week.
none of them will. None of them
No.
will. But yeah, no, I'm very excited again. I am very interested in Alicent at this point, so I'm happy to see where she is. But you guys bring up a really good point about Rhaenyra. It is, yeah, what's it going to do? And also, I think we're going to get a few more of our what's going to kill Viserys bingo card boxes checked.
He's so good at giving us boxes to check. 'Cause
Yeah, he's got so many.
He got so many.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I expect a lot of Targaryen tomfoolery in the next episode, as always.
Yeah, I just think that the only thing I have to add here is that, yeah, I think Daemon's going to show up. He's going to have shenanigans. He's going to try to use his newfound political power to drive a wedge in between other influencers and small council members between him and Viserys. We even get, in the next time on, we get Viserys shouting, "Who told you these lies?" I was like, oh, good, lies. That's always a good start. So, yeah, I think, just Daemon driving a wedge wherever he can to place seeds of doubt and the influential people running the Seven Kingdoms about who should be king. That wraps up our conversation today, ladies and gentlemen. Just quickly want to remind you that you can follow the Cast Beyond the Wall on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT or on Facebook at facebook.com/Cast Beyond the Wall. And if you enjoyed this conversation, or maybe if you didn't, please leave us a rating and review on your preferred podcast app. That includes Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Daniel Beaukemper, where can people keep up with you and your work online?
Yeah, find me primarily at the Cinematropolis, but also worldliteraturettoday.org. Brand new review just came out of a down-home meal for these hard times. And yeah, definitely check it out. A great short fiction anthology written by a very prominent up-and-coming author from Germany. So yeah, either way, check that out. And then you can find me on Twitter at Daniel Beaukemper. Just spell the Beaukemper as best as you can. You'll find it eventually. But yeah, otherwise, mostly the Cinematropolis.
I'm so glad we were able to find someone of actual Westerosi heritage to join the show finally. It's been long overdue. Daniel Stahl, how about you? How can people converse with you or support your work?
Well, in addition to just leaving a review or tell me how wonderful I was in this episode today, you can also always reach out to me on Twitter at Daniel Stoll, the number 23. Daniel Stoll 23.
Of course, you can find me tweeting about all sorts of things. Honestly, a lot of House of the Dragon these days, but also some films and some video game talk over on Twitter at CMasters Talk. That is letter C Masters Talk, or writing about films, mostly podcasting about films. Let's be real. Over at thecinematropolis.com, our most recent episode was sort of a look back at a few of the biggest films of August 2022. Turns out, despite it not being a huge month box office-wise, there's a lot of really good movies you can catch from August of this year. And when you look at the slate, the upcoming slate in September of either indies, low-budget horror films, or no other movies at all, or maybe perhaps re-releases, maybe it's worth checking out that August podcast to see what you may have missed, because there's some real gems in there. Thank you so much for listening to our recap on the third episode of House of the Dragon. Join us next week when we continue going beyond the wall. And until then, gentlemen, let's go on a hunt. A glorious hunt.
Sounds like such a good idea.
What could possibly go wrong, Daniel?
Nothing.